Hello, everybody, and welcome to the November 20th, 2018 edition of the Ephrom Josine Show. I am your host, Ephrom Josine, and the first story I want to cover tonight is something that I thought was very interesting. You see, it turns out that Ivanka Trump, who, if you do not know, is a daughter to the president, has been caught using a private email account to conduce government businesses, specifically her personal account. Yeah, that sounds kind of familiar. I could think of someone else who did that. Wasn't it Hillary Clinton who did that? The person who Donald Trump said on stage he was going to hire a special prosecutor to go after? You know, he still hasn't, by the way. Just wanted to make that clear. So, wait, let me get this straight. Hillary Clinton does this, and Donald Trump, at least during the campaign, talked about how bad this was and how illegal it was. And may I remind you, the CIA and FBI launched several investigations into her over. So where are all the investigations that are going to be launched to Ivanka Trump? I'm calling it right now, it's more than likely not going to happen. Or if they do happen, they will be far less in number and far less thorough than the investigations that happened towards Hillary Clinton. For that matter, I don't recall Donald saying he was going to hire a special prosecutor to go after one of his own family members, specifically his daughter. And to be fair, I don't think any man would, or at least under most scenarios. However, he's the president of the United States, and as such, he has to be above emotional reactions like this. However, what I find the most disturbing is the complete silence from the Republicans on this. The only Fox show that has covered this news that I could find is The Five, or Five People Have Quite Possibly the Worst Dinner Party of All Time. And during it, 4 out of 5 of, well, the 5, defended Ivanka Trump, saying that it was different than what happened to Hillary Clinton. Because, I don't know, Fox has written about 3 or 4 articles at the time of writing that you can find on their website at foxnews.com. Out of them, none of them are just a straight up story, at least none that I could find. All of them are responses to the story, specifically the Trump team responding. So, wait a minute, that's more important than the actual news? Same thing with Town Hall, however, even more so, as they have about 5 articles out at the time of recording. Not a single one of them that I could find just straight on the story. And the Daily Wire is completely silent on it. Only one of their 4 programs has mentioned it, that being it taking up a segment on the Ben Shapiro show. And they have no articles about it. The latest piece in the Ivanka Trump tab was 8 times the New York Times was bad for Jews, which was written November 19th, yesterday, before the Ivanka Trump story came out. Or at least reached mass attention. But you know what? People like Ben Shapiro have more important things to talk about, so I'm being unfair. Take, for example, his recent column, which I found through the National Review, Vice movie. Just more anti-conservative vitriol. Now, mind you, this is the 3rd title to this article. The second one being Vice movie anti-Bush, anti-conservative vitriol, which I assume he had to change because there have been these big debates in right-wing spheres about whether or not George W. Bush was an actual conservative. He was, for the record. He was a neoconservative, for God's sake. And they just tried to ignore that for the past 10 years. But the original one is the one I like the most. The same left that despised President Trump despised George W. Bush long before him. Fascinating. It's almost like there have been more than one bad leaders in U.S. history. Good to know you have some intelligence, Ben. But in case you do not know what Shapiro is talking about, there's a new movie coming out called Vice. It's supposed to be a dramatization of the Bush administration with specific focus on former Vice President Dick Cheney's role. It looks kind of interesting. I don't normally watch dramatizations, but I guess maybe if it was on Hulu or Netflix, I'd give it a watch. It's coming out this Christmas if you guys are curious. Also, a little bit of advice to Ben, or a national review at least. That's drop caps are usually supposed to be in the margin, not out of it, but I'm nitpicking. This week, The Hollywood Reporter featured a lengthy paean to the new anti-Bush film Vice. A little nitpick, but it's not really supposed to be an anti-Bush film, it's supposed to be a dramatization of him. Unless you would call something like I, Claudius an anti-Caligula television series. In which case, you aren't actually wrong now that I think about it. This particular film is dedicated to the apparent evil of former Vice President Dick Cheney, the left's all-purpose nefarious boogaboo during the Bush years. Okay, I'll give you this. You have a pretty okay writing style. But did it ever consider to you that maybe that's just because he was a bad person, kinda? I mean, for God's sake, one of his first political movement or moments was working to try and get Richard Nixon off the hook. He then went to the House, where he was one of the main people leading the charge to not prosecute Oliver North. And he admitted to all of this, for the record, in a documentary called The World According to Dick Cheney, which I'd actually highly recommend. The film isn't unique. Wow. You mean there have been other films about Dick Cheney? Oh my god. It Follows W, starring John Boren, a box office failure, appeal to popularity. Truth, another box office failure starring Robert Redford about Dan Rather's attempt to take down George W. Bush with a fake letter about his military service. Not familiar enough with that scandal in order to comment on it. And You're Welcome, America, starring Will Ferrell, which aired on HBO. That was a play, not a movie, you idiot. Also, that aired like a month after he was done being president. So that doesn't even make any sense as a point. None of these films, the last one wasn't a film, raked in the cash. But, okay, so yes, there have been some films about George W. Bush that were box office sponsored. There have also been some very popular ones like, I don't know, off the top of my head, Fahrenheit 9/11? The highest grossing documentary of all time? But that's not stopping Adam McKay. It's almost like he's doing it for more than just financial reasons and more. He just wants to do dramatizations of political events. What's wrong with that? Producer of HBO's Secession, from taking on a president who's left office a decade ago. You know, there are just too many films about the Holocaust these days. I mean, it ended like, 70 years ago? In fact, you know what? Going back to I, Claudius, I think we should remember the classic Ben Shapiro article, Why is BBC making a series about a guy who died like 2,000 years ago? It's funny because Ben Shapiro wasn't even alive when that show came out. What's driving McKay? His own vision, maybe? The need to live out his anger against Bush. Or his own... through a vision. Artists have been... I don't know whether or not this film will be good, for the record. It's possible it'll be awful. But I'm not denying McKay did it partly just because he likes doing dramatizations of political moments, and this one is one he particularly found interesting. I mean, artist types, which to be fair are all over Hollywood, do that all the time. Going back to Michael Moore, he's the man who released a film on the crash of '08 during the Great Recession. People like that don't seem to really care about money. McKay recalls attending the victory party for John Kerry, who, needless to say, did not win. Well, he was more rigged out of it, but that's another story. Everyone you could imagine was there, McKay described, including Tom Hanks, Nicole Kidman, and Farrell. Once again, we're like, oh, they're going to lose. There's no way you'd re-elect these guys after the disaster we just had. Should I tell him? I feel like I should tell him. There were people convicted of vote tampering in 2004, you idiot. And all the states where that happened, all went for Bush. Just gonna say that right here and now. Why do you think there were honest-to-God controversies about whether or not we should use Ohio electoral ballots? Because people were convicted of tampering with them. But that ran once while we were too busy talking about... Who even remembers at that point? I remember Frank Rich was on the phone, and he's like, it's over, and within 2 minutes, the entire party had cleared out. McKay turned away from a political project until The Big Short. But now he's back, and he's betting a $60 million budget that Americans are desperate to see Christian Bale put on 45 pounds and play Cheney as a Machiavellian devil hell-bent on sending American troops to the battle for no good reason. To be fair, that's not an inaccurate portrayal. Although, no, there were good reasons, most notably his stock in the company he was a CEO of before he was vice president, literally just before he was vice president. And there was also this guy you may want to look up named Kenneth Lay. I know, he's been dead for a while, but he was alive at that point, I'll tell you that. He ran this company. I'd recommend you also look that up. It was called Enron. The cast is massive and includes Sam Rockwell as W, Steve Carell as Donald Rumsfeld, and Tyler Perry as Colin Powell. You know how out of touch I am? I only know who one of those people are, fun fact. I don't follow pop culture very much. According to McKay, Cheney was far more powerful than W. To be fair, I don't actually believe those theories. Bob Woodward actually debunked those theories in War Within when he talked about how essentially Cheney had to get approval to everything he did from George W. Bush. Now, mind you, it's perfectly possible he just signed the papers without even reading them. However, I think that's kind of a stretch. This is how you got Trump. Now, mind you, if you think Ben Shapiro is a serious political commentator, I'd like to read you this next part. That's an overused phrase to the point of parody, of course, but why not parody the parodyist? Here's the reality. The same left that despises President Trump despised George W. Bush long before him. Actually, to be honest, Trump's been more relevant for much longer than George Bush had been. I mean, Trump's been relevant since the 80s. When did George W. Bush become relevant? Like 94 when he became governor of Texas? I mean, George H.W. Bush was relevant by that point. But we don't really hate him as much as we think he was weird. For the most part, the talk about Trump's disgrace in office, talk about Trump's toxic personality, and the talk about Trump's divisiveness, all of it is a cover for the fact that those on the cultural left, what separates the cultural left from the political left, out of curiosity? Despise those who aren't on the political left. Why not just say left? Why are you separating that? Nothing about you makes any sense to me. They see them as idiots, he got us there, and rubes, or as evil manipulators. Again, guilty as charged, dude. For them, Trump isn't an outlier. Yeah, he's the same as all Republicans. We've been saying that for a while now. I was saying during the 2016 primary, it doesn't matter which one of them gets the nominee. They all bow to the same master. He's merely the latest iteration of the dastardly conservative movement that launched with Nixon. Actually, the conservative movement kind of goes back a little farther than that, but I'm nitpicking. And even then, I want to see Shapiro defend Richard Nixon. That would be beautiful, especially considering how Roger Stone, who has a Nixon tattoo and a Richard Nixon blow up doll, admits how corrupt Richard Nixon was. Extended through Reagan, grew to Bush. A little nitpick, but there should be Bush Sr. and Bush Jr. there, considering there were two President Bushes. And now accumulates in Trump. At least McKay is honest enough to admit the simple fact Trump for the left isn't a departure from conservatism. He's just another variation on them, on a theme. All conservatives are evil. Well, that's a little bit of a simplification. We don't believe they're all evil, as in all Republican voters. We believe the ones in government are, don't get us wrong. But most of us acknowledge that there are plenty of perfectly fine people who vote Republican. Which is why, of course, Trump is president right now. Now, this is where I say I refuse to take Ben Shapiro seriously as a political commentator anymore. I'm just going to read you this. Leftist contempt for conservatives seeps through Hollywood and drips off our television and movie screens. And conservatives responded in 2016 to that contempt by nominating a man who wouldn't take an insult, but just flip-flopped on every position known to mankind, who wouldn't respect the office of the presidency enough to forgo a cultural fight, and essentially, can we just have a president who's interested in being president anymore instead of this weird, I'm also going to anger